Just when I think you couldn't possibly be any dumber, you go and do something like this. And totally redeem yourself!
What's up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. And yeah, redemption could be the real story here. While this may not be the handheld for everyone, by the end of this review you should know which side of the fence you're on and if this gaming device is for you. While the story here isn't perfection, my experience reviewing the Claw 8 with the second generation Intel Core Ultra 7 has been night and day compared to last year's launch of the Gen 1 Intel Core Ultra 7 with the Claw. So with that said, guys, let's get into the review of the new MSI Claw 8 AI+. So first up is what comes in the box, and I won't spend too much time here because I covered this in the unboxing and first impressions video. I'll put a link in the description for you if you want to check that out. But basically it's a simple unboxing and you get your typical startup guides and paperwork, a 65-watt charger, and of course the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus device itself. So nothing amazing or fancy here, but everything you need to get going, get started, and get gaming. Also, no case with the Claw devices either, something that is nice about the Legion Go and Steam Decks, but not included with these, and they weren't last year either. So let's hit on the specs real quick and take a look at what we're dealing with here. This is MSI and Intel's second generation and second time around with these devices. The MSI Claw 8 comes with the new second generation Intel Core Ultra 7 APU. That's an all-in-one 8-core, 8-thread CPU with 4 performance cores and 4 E-cores, and the Intel Arc 140V graphics with 8 X-cores. Supporting the much more efficient and better performing Intel APU is 32 gigabytes of 8533 MHz onboard RAM. We have a 1TB NVMe SSD here, and the screen, which we'll take a closer look at shortly, is an 8-inch 1200p IPS touchscreen running at 120Hz with VRR and up to 500 nits. We've got Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth 5.4, along with 2 Thunderbolt 4 USB-C ports, a microSD card reader slot, and standard audio jack. All that is powered by the 80 watt-hour battery, which actually gives some pretty good battery life for this device, which again we'll take a look at later in the review as well. And lastly, we have Hall effect joysticks and triggers on the device. So what about the look, feel, and overall design of the MSI Claw 8? Well, the two-tone color certainly seems to garner a quick love it or hate it reaction. I personally really like the look and the device and the two-tone color, which for better or worse makes it stand out from other handhelds. I'd love to see some front color plates that were swappable to different colors through like a magnet system. I've had controllers like that before, but for now that's not the kind of option that exists here. As far as comfort, it is a flatter design, more like the original Ally than maybe a Steam Deck or Legion Go. However, being a bigger device, there's plenty of room to rest your fingers if you have bigger hands, or small grooves all the way down the back that will work well for smaller hands too. Seems to catch the fingers pretty well. And even though we have the weight of that 80 watt-hour battery, the device feels balanced and, for me, comfortable to hold. I think the ergonomics are really good here for the size. The whole device is kind of a matte finish and also feels nice to hold. The Hall effect joysticks feel good, but are a little bit looser than I'd like. I'd like a little bit more tension on those, but they haven't really bothered me so far. Not quite as bad as the original Ally ones. The triggers and shoulder buttons also feel really nice and are up there with some of my favorites on any of the handhelds I've tested. Face buttons also all feel nice, and the D-pad is decent for a D-pad. It's pretty concave, a lot of room for your finger in there. Some people may or may not like that. I know some of you guys like the flatter D-pads, especially for some of the fighting games. But overall, I'm personally happy with the look and feel of the device. Overall, build quality is really nice. It's been fun to game on and very comfortable. A quick look at size comparison between a couple of devices to give you a better idea of the Claw 8's size. Even though the Legion Go has a bigger screen, the devices are very similar in size. Legion Go has always been a favorite of mine, and I love the screen size, but I will say the Claw 8 is a good bit more comfortable. Though, minus the removable controllers and kickstand, compared to the original Ally, you can see the bigger difference between the 7-inch and 8-inch screens, as well as the overall device size. I know larger devices aren't everybody's preference, so what is nice is MSI offers the same Intel 2nd generation Ultra 7 with all the same specs, just wrapped in their last year's 7-inch form factor. So if you're looking for a smaller device but you still want to try out Intel or MSI, you have that option. It also costs $100 less. But I really do like this 8-inch size, and I think that 8-inch screen might be a nice new sweet spot for these handhelds. For me, 7-inch gets a little bit small, and going up above 8, while I love it, Legion Go, love the size of the screen, it does get kind of big sometimes. The 8-inch just feels a bit more comfortable. Speakers on the MSI Claw 8 are front-facing and have plenty of volume, along with pretty full sound and, dare I say, some decent lows for a device like this, and even at max volume, rarely suffer from distortion. They're up there with the best audio I've tested on a handheld. These are all tested with no software or equalizers or anything like that, just straight up sound coming from Windows. And while it is hard to capture this stuff, I want you guys to go ahead and take a listen here, and I'll compare a few devices to the MSI Claw. So yeah, no complaints with the speakers from me, and I put them right up there and probably better than my Ally X, which have been my favorite speakers for a while and miles better than the Legion Go. But we all know about the original Legion Go speakers, so some great audio for me here on the new Claw. When it comes to the screen itself, I know most of us want our OLED screens and maybe HDR. But that also comes with a cost, and I think MSI did what they had to do to kind of keep things down. We're already at that $899 USD, so $900 range. The additional cost of an OLED here with VRR would have pushed this device to 1K or more, I'm pretty sure, and that would make it much less competitive later in the year. That said, this is a very nice 8-inch IPS screen that I've really enjoyed gaming on. The size is really a sweet spot for between the larger 8.8 or larger 11-inch displays and of course something like a 7-inch display on the ROG Ally. The 120Hz VRR has been great in gaming as well, offering smooth gameplay, even at variable frame rates. I'm not someone who locks frame rates often. When compared to something like the Legion Go, we have a little less brightness and saturation with the MSI Claw, but they are very close, probably more noticeable in person here than on the video. And compared to something like my original Ally, it's definitely an improvement to size, brightness, and color saturation. And I have the original launch Ally, which has an even worse screen than the ones they made after the launch version of those. So the screen's pretty good for an IPS, and I have no issues with it here on the device. VRR has been great, 120Hz has been good, and the color is right up there, pretty close to the Legion Go. I'm not going to get into the fan noise too much here, but it's been very good. At 8 or 17 watts, you would struggle to hear the fan while gaming, even in quieter environments. At 30 watts, the fan of course has to spin up and to keep up with the thermals a bit more and have those under control. But even at that, while you can hear the fan, it's not as loud as, say, my Legion Go if I have it on some custom cooling trying to handle 25 or 30 watts. Temps this time around on the 2nd gen Intel are much better than their Gen 1, and the cooling solution here from MSI seems to work really well on the Claw 8. While it's one of the more quiet handhelds I've used, the fan is audible, but I think in most gaming situations it's not going to be a factor. It is one of the more quiet ones I've tested. So with that new Intel chip does come some pretty good battery life too. With the 80 watt-hour battery and more efficient 2nd generation Intel Ultra 7 chip, the MSI Claw 8 offers some pretty good and competitive battery life. I'm used to my Ally X with its 80 watt-hour battery, and I game 20 to 25 watts there, and I'm used to getting my 2.5 to 3 hours. Now, I only tested gaming battery life, and as far as, say, streaming videos and lightweight work like that, you're going to get even more time out of this thing, well over 12 hours and beyond. And on standby, or say just sitting there, turned on to 20 hours or more easily that way. But I really focused on gaming stuff here. I think the AI power mode needs some work, and I really stuck with manual modes. And I wasn't a fan of the AI stuff in the last Claw either. Keep in mind your own settings from screen brightness to speaker volume and other ways that you may be using the device or running software can always affect battery life. But for 8 watts TDP, the total power draw tends to be around 7 to 13 watts, essentially giving you 6 to 10 hours of battery life, and that's pretty conservative. I could even see getting about 11, maybe 12, if you're really running something that's not even pushing the 8 watts. I've seen stuff come down to about 5. At 17 watts, TDP typically draws a total power of 23 to 27 watts, giving about 2.9 to 3.5 hours of battery life. And at 30 watts TDP, the total power draw is around 39 to 42. It fluctuates and offers about 2 hours of battery life, give or take, depending on all of your settings. So all in all, it does offer some good battery life and efficiency, and depending on what games you're playing or tasks you're doing, you can really squeeze some time out of this thing. Alright, so now we have MSI's Center M software, and this is like your front-end software to Windows. And the other handhelds like Legion have Space, and the Asus ROG Ally have Armory Crate SE, and those all work great. Now, your quick settings are actually here integrated into the Xbox game bar. So all of your quick settings that you access here with your quick settings menu button actually just integrated right here into the game bar, which is actually pretty cool. So it's similar to the ROG Ally's command center, but different in that it's actually integrated into the game bar, which I actually like here. So I haven't had any problems with that, and it works pretty well. Nothing too buggy on that end. Now, when it comes to the actual Center M software here, this is where you have all the rest of your options, where your game library will show up. It automatically throws this artwork in there for you. You have your game library where you can scan for games, change your background, that type of thing. If we go up, we have our gaming platforms, Steam, Ubisoft, Xbox, all that kind of stuff here as well. So you can log into all of those. If we press X, we can go to game profile, make some adjustments to our artwork and stuff that we have there. And now at the bottom row, we have all of our actual settings. So user scenario is going to be our manual for TDP. You can even adjust your fans if you want, and AI engine and endurance. Now, AI engine and endurance, I haven't used a lot. Endurance is about a 17 watt mode, and AI engine will go above that, but they really haven't been my favorite. I think they could use some tuning, and I just like using manual. 8 watts on easy stuff, 17 watts on semi-easy stuff to AAA, and 30 watts when I really need the performance and frame pacing. We also have our ability to go in here and make some changes to our macros, combination keys, calibration, gyro, all that kind of stuff for your gamepad in here. Now, you can't make keyboard combination keys yet, which is annoying for being able to set up some stuff, but you can set any kind of combination of keys up from your gamepad here on the device. Same thing over here in desktop mode, just a few less options for you here, but same kind of combination keys, macro key setups, and all of that. It's okay, but it's a little clunky. It's not the best layout they have there. And then your next tab is going to be your news and your update section, where you'll get updates for the device. This is where you'll go besides Windows updates and the Windows Store. We also have the quick settings editor. So this is for your MSI quick settings that's in game bar. You can click on any of these and change them out, get rid of them, turn them into something else, whatever you want there. Your connection for Wi-Fi and all of that, and then your settings tab where you have more options for that AI engine, which again, I'm not a big fan of. I prefer running everything manually here. We also have our Mystic light, so we can change any of the lighting around. I've just got it set to its default here, but I usually wind up turning it off or just using one solid color dimmed down a little bit. Noise cancellation options in here, which again I keep turned off on the device. Media gallery for any of your screenshots, system information, your service, and general settings. So everything in there, and it's functionable, but it's not necessarily as feature full as something like Armory Crate, and I'd like to see a lot more added here. All right, now it's time to take a closer look at game performance. We'll look at a couple of indie games at 8 watts, and we're also going to look at 1200p performance at 17 watts and 30 watts. Now, in future videos, I'll take a look at more settings and 800p and that type of thing. And we'll be testing games all year as they come out as well on the device. So this is just a good starting point and gives us a really good idea of where we're landing here with this device for performance. Now, quickly in 3D Mark, I didn't go crazy here. A couple of time spies at 17 watts. 3916 here, all default settings on that. A little lower on the CPU side, but decent enough on the GPU. And then running that at 30 watts, we get a nice improvement here, 4410 overall with 7803 on the CPU and 4096 on the GPU. It's definitely more balanced than what that Gen 1 was giving us. And when it comes to the indie games, again, just like when we talked about in the battery life, it's a pretty low draw on the system, around 11 here for Turtles, and it's ranging 7 to 8 watts TDP as I have it set manually to 8, and it runs really smooth and you can get a ton of battery life. Obviously, easy to run games are going to do well here, but that wasn't necessarily the case with the original MSI Claw. It really suffered even in easy to run stuff when it came to the lower TDPs. So this is actually really nice to see on here. I'm sure there's some room for improvement between BIOS and power management and drivers, but works pretty well. Now, some games like Dragon Quest, the remake here should still be pretty easy to run, but it did suffer sometimes at 8 watts. But when I allowed up to 17, it would fluctuate from 11 to 17 and run just fine. That's why I'd like to see a 12 watt TDP option. Getting into some of the harder to run stuff, well, we have Cyberpunk here, and again, 1200p, we're at low and medium textures here, XeSS quality, and 17 watts versus 30 watts. There's of course going to be a difference in FPS, but also there's tends to be frame pacing issues at 17 watts in certain areas of a lot of games. Another reason why I'd like to see a 22 watt option or a slider for some of this stuff, but 43 versus 59, 16 FPS difference, 17 to 30 watts there. And then out in some real world gameplay you'll see too, both perform and feel playable and fine. If you were locking to 30 FPS, which wouldn't be my favorite for this game, but it would do fine at the 17. But yeah, having something a little bit above that in that 22 would be great, because 30 watts really sings on this thing, and pretty much any game I throw at it, frame pacing, FPS, and all that stays really good on here. But it is nice to save battery and run at lower TDP. Now, Forza Horizon 5 is another one that runs really well, of course, and even at 17 watts, it does pretty good up against the 30. Still, though, you will see those frame pacing issues from time to time and run almost 20 FPS lower, and you'll see the less stability there in the chart as far as the benchmark goes here. But getting into some races and away from some of the benchmarks and open world stuff, 30 watts and 17 watts runs really well. We get some great FPS and clean gameplay here at 30, and even over at 17 on the same track. We don't have as many of those frame pacing options in some of these races, and it still has a decent FPS. There's plenty of room for improvement at this wattage, whether it be from drivers or whatever the case, but it still works pretty well. Black Myth Wukong is another one where you'll see the same thing. 30 watts does a fantastic job here, and 17 does decent. I'm actually surprised at how well it did here in the benchmark, but when you get into real-world gameplay, I did suffer a little bit, so I left things at 30. But the thing is, I would generally run this game at 800p. It is pretty tough to run, and I do prefer the higher FPS, so that's something we'll test in the future. But since I was doing 1200p stuff here, I wanted to show that, and to do 1200p, 30 watts was the better option. Again, I just wish we had a 22 or 25 watt option between that 17 and 30. Now, a little bit of an older AAA title here with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and again, you'll see a similar thing. Better performance at the 30 watts, decent at 17. And this game doesn't have near the kind of like frame pacing issues and stuff that it has over on some of the newer games. It's probably a little less CPU heavy, and you can see when we're adding 30 watts, the CPU usage is actually always lower in these games versus over at the 17 watts, which is another reason you get those frame pacing issues. When your CPU is getting hit, or cores are getting hit too much, and then it causes that stutter between that and the GPU. So again, either tweaking at the 17 watts from them or giving us more TDP options would probably solve that for some of these games that just need a little bit more. Miles Morales runs pretty well at 17 and 30 as well, just like the other games. You'll see similar kind of performance here. It's actually a little better than I thought it would be at 17, because I figured we would be hitting the CPU here, and we do, but I think this game's a little better optimized than some of the other ones that we were taking a look at. And 30 watts does, of course, even better here. Much higher FPS, a little cleaner when you're swinging around the city and that type of thing. But yeah, more than playable performance at 17 or 30 watts here. So I think you guys are pretty much seeing the story. Please give us an option between 8 and 17 and between 17 and 30 with this thing, and maybe tweak the 17 watt a little bit more between the drivers and stuff, and there's a ton of potential here. Now, a harder to run game like this one just crushes all handhelds, but I threw it in here with Horizon Zero Dawn Remaster at 1200p. Definitely an 800p game for me to try to run, but even at that, I prefer to play the original on handhelds because this one's just pretty crushing, but it did run here. Now Marvel Rivals does pretty well. I tested this in the 10 game benchmark video that I put up, and there's some more gameplay over in that video if you want to check it out. But it ultimately does really well at 30 watts, and it can suffer at 17. The thing is, this is a Unreal Engine 5 game, and I said when this game launched, I don't prefer Unreal Engine 5 right now for multiplayer competitive games like this, because UE5 is just heavy to run. In general, on all devices, is harder to run and get higher FPS, and that type of an engine, you're just not able to push a higher FPS here, especially at lower wattage, like we could something maybe like an Overwatch or something. Very playable, but I think you would need the 30 watts for that one. But ultimately, guys, I think you see the point here. It would be nice to have a couple of more TDP options, maybe some more driver work at that 17 watt level. But yeah, it's pretty darn good across the board, and I'm really interested to see how this device handles games throughout 2025 with more driver support and with all the newer games that are coming out. So yeah, that's pretty much what game performance is looking like here on the Claw 8 right now at launch. And while I have upcoming videos comparing to the Z1 Extreme on the Legion Go and Ally X, just really quickly, this can really depend on what game you're in, but the new chip from Intel often is beating the Z1 Extreme. Again, it does depend on the game. There's times the Z1 Extreme wins, and there's times that they kind of break even. But at the 30 watts here on Cyberpunk, you can see there's a big difference when we're talking about the 1200p low settings here with medium textures, XeSS quality, and FSR quality, FSR3 rather, quality for the Legion Go. And then that comes down to a difference of 42 and 59 FPS. And yeah, the settings are identical. And if I jump over to 17 watts, this is where they've swapped sides on you here, but we've got the MSI Claw on the left here and the Legion Go on the right. 17 watts, you're going to see a big difference here again in performance, and the Claw, even though I complain about its frame pacing in some games at 17 watts, is performing better ultimately than the Z1 Extreme here. Although the frame pacing still might not be as good, it is performing better. Again, this is going to vary per game. I'm not saying you'll see this kind of difference in all games. There's going to be times the Z1 Extreme wins, but seeing stuff like this tells me that there's a pretty decent future here in 2025 for comparing this chipset to the Z1 Extreme, Z2 Extreme, and other chips this year. So I find that pretty interesting. Before I wrap up the review with some final thoughts, I do want to list out some pros and cons to kind of put things in perspective here for the Claw 8. As far as pros, we have solid game performance in most titles at various TDP, and it's a big improvement over their first gen device. It's efficient, especially compared to Gen 1. The big 80 watt-hour battery is great and pairs well with the new Intel chip. The 8-inch screen size is a sweet spot for me and looks great as well. Excellent audio from the front-facing speakers help out the Claw 2. So no device is perfect, and we're always going to have cons as well. These larger battery devices are heavier. Not an issue for me, but something to mention because I know it is a bother to some people, from size to weight. Immature drivers, as Intel is still a less mature platform than AMD, which also means not having the feature set from AMD Adrenalin software, and sometimes drivers that don't work as well. MSI Center M definitely needs some more work, but a lot of the bugs I were having did get fixed in a newer update for MSI's Center M, and I think we just, at this point, need more feature sets added in there, something more like Armory Crate, where we have a lot more options. Power management could use some work in the AI mode, and I think maybe that thing could use some more options so that it can more variably switch between 8, 17, and 30 watts. It kind of just seems like one mode that tends to run a little better than 17 watts. But yeah, I think that it could use some work, and we really need more TDP options like 12 and 22 watts. Give me 12 between that 8 and that 17, and give me 22 between the 17 and 30. I think 22 would work great, and 12 would work great for a lot of games where I'm seeing frame pace issues where I need to bump up the wattage. Now, really the final con here would be the price, I think, for most people. We have a lot of devices to choose from and many more coming out. It would seem, though, that newer handhelds are likely to be more expensive. And I believe later this year, something like the Legion Go 2 will easily be over $1,000 because of its OLED screen, larger size, and Z2 Extreme. And while this is one of the highest priced mainstream handhelds at launch, I don't know that it'll stay that way. And MSI may also offer some sales and all kinds of things that could happen this year with the device. And MSI does offer the same spec Intel device, but in that smaller 7-inch size in the same chassis that we got last year for $799, putting it a bit more on par again with something like the Ally X. And if you're someone looking to give Intel a shot, or MSI might be a good option, especially if you just don't want the larger device. But it will sacrifice on screen size and battery life. So yeah, it's expensive and may or may not be worth it depending on what you're looking for, but I think that may be the trend as we go down through 2025, where if you want one of the newer handhelds and not last gen or not the Z1 Extreme or whatever the case may be, that you are going to be looking at something more expensive. So that's my review of the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus. Everyone's going to have their own preferences and difference of opinions here. We have a lot of choice these days and more coming in 2025 when it comes to handheld PCs. I think the real story here is the major jump in efficiency and performance from Intel on these second-gen chips and MSI sticking with it and making a couple of devices that seem to really bring them back into the picture for handhelds. Last year's model was rough to say the least, and my experience with this device is completely different in the best ways. MSI and Intel have a solid handheld here, and for less money you can get a smaller same-spec device with the Claw 7 AI Plus. But I think if you're looking to jump into Intel and to the MSI Claw, the 8-inch model is worth a look. Is it worth the $899 USD price tag? Well, that's going to be for you to decide. But when you look at the whole package and the specs here, I do think it could be a compelling offer. Plus, it's nice to see Intel continuing its improvements here and bringing competition to the space. And while we are comparing the Claw 8, which is MSI's second-gen device, to Gen 1 devices like the Legion Go and Ally X when it comes to price and performance, with some maturity of the platform from Intel and support from MSI, that $900 MSI Claw 8 could look even more compelling down the road in 2025, but only time will tell. But especially when it looks like devices like the Legion Go 2 could be $1,000 or more, it could be more compelling. Still though, the Legion Go 2 is my most anticipated handheld of 2025. That thing is going to rock. But what may be even more exciting here is if Intel can continue these types of improvements generation to generation in their next chips. We could see some real blows come between AMD and Intel when it comes to the handheld market. I'm also looking at you, Nvidia. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed the review and found it helpful. No matter what gaming handheld you decide to buy, enjoy the gaming. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.